So hi, Elna and Gaia. Are you both in Sweden, by the way?
Yes,
You
yes,
are.
yeah,
Okay.
we
So this
are.
is this is Sweden talking to Scotland about horse training. So Elna got in touch with me to ask me if we could talk about an issue that is it's a perennial discussion, I think, in the positive horse training world about whether when we're keeping horses force free and training them force free, so we're using positive reinforcement, systematic desensitization, and counter conditioning. And we're trying to avoid aversive training. So we're trying to avoid using negative reinforcement, positive punishment, and flooding. Then are we, or could we be doing our horses a disservice and negatively impacting their welfare by not exposing them to stressful situations or to situations where they might experience aversives from humans? So the question is there a place for training horses with negative reinforcement, even in a positive reinforcement paradigm where you're wanting to be force free? Is that a good summary of the question, you two?
Yeah, I would
Yeah,
say so.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's first of all, something I think it's worth us exploring is there's a difference between, in the same way that there's a difference between bad training and good training in a pressure release or aversive training context. It's also fair to say there's good training and bad training in a positive reinforcement context. And really, I I think it's a good idea to stay away from debates about positive reinforcement done badly, because then we could all agree that it's possible to use food in training in a way that becomes aversive for the horse. So the horse becomes frustrated or anxious about the food. And as far as I'm concerned, if the use of food in training is causing anxiety and frustration, it's not positive reinforcement. It's
Absolutely.
negative reinforcement, because if the food alleviates stress, if the food alleviates tension, anxiety, and frustration, then it's a negative reinforcer. It's not a positive reinforcer. So that's one of the first things to sort of get rid of is if you're dealing with people who are saying, oh well, positively trained horses show these different behaviors that are indicative of stress or anxiety around food, then we can immediately get rid of that as a discussion by saying, well, yeah, but that's positive reinforcement training done badly. And actually, it's not positive reinforcement anymore, it's negative reinforcement. So that's one of the first things I'd say. I think the second thing is that whether we're using positive reinforcement or aversive training, and I'll explain in a minute why I'm going to say aversive rather than negative reinforcement. It's a really good reason why I'm not saying negative reinforcement. Whether we're using positive reinforcement, systematic desensitization, counter conditioning, or aversive training, we should really prepare our horses for situations they might realistically encounter, like having to be confined in a stable to recover from an injury. Okay, so if somebody was to say to you, oh well, as Elna explained to me before we started the call, there's been a situation where someone in the end felt they needed to euthanize a horse because it couldn't be treated for an injury because it wouldn't stay in a stable. And the reason for that was because the people who had the horse had been using treat training. I could equally tell you about lots of stories of people who trained with aversives and their horses couldn't be treated either because they couldn't stay in a stable. So I don't think the issue of confinement is exclusively a positive reinforcement training challenge. I think whether you're training your horse with aversives or you're training your horse with food, it's a great idea to prepare them for things that might happen to them, like injury, which would mean that they had to be shut in a stable 24/7. Does that make sense to you too?
Yeah. And I think I really agree with the fact that it's unfair to put this on the training method.
Yeah.
Because you could just as easily have a horse that you are meaning to train with aversives, but you might have just gotten it as a yearling off from a forest somewhere, and you bring it home, and the first day in the field at your stable, it gets injured. And you had no time to prepare it. And not because your training method is bad, but because you had no time.
Yeah, so, great point. Yeah. Do you want to add anything, Elna?
No, I don't think so now.
So I think we could all agree as a horse owning community, a horse carrying community, that I don't think anyone would disagree that it's important to train horses for things like, I think it's really important to train them to load in a trailer or a float if you're in America, in case you had to take them to a vet. Because what you don't want is the stress of trying to force a horse into a trailer when you're already stressed because the horse is injured or sick. I think it's a good idea to train horses to be stables, but then there are some people who don't have any stables, whether they're keeping a horse in an aversive training paradigm or a positive training. If you haven't got a trailer and you haven't got any stables and your horse lives out in the field 24/7, you're at the same disadvantage regardless of whether you're using food for training. So I think we need to sort of look at that situation as independent of how we're trying to produce repeatable behaviors from the horse, and say those are good things to do, but not everyone can do them. And when people find themselves in a situation where, because they've been unable to train the horse, or because they've neglected to train the horse when they could have, anybody could be in a situation where they have to euthanize a horse because it can't be treated. So, I would agree with folk who are, if people are critical of someone who's had a horse for 5 years and they try and train it to load in the trailer the day it gets colic and needs to go to the vet, clearly that's not a great position to put yourself in. And yes, the horse's welfare would suffer if you haven't prepared it. But I think that's true for both situations. And I could think of many cases of people that I know who've had horses who've been unable to treat them, or certainly unable to follow the advice of a vet because they didn't have the facilities, more than because they hadn't trained for them, really. I think the other thing to say is that of the horses that I've seen that have been difficult to treat by a veterinarian, and that's the emergency situation, isn't it? It's nearly always because they've been subjected to forceful training. So they've been forced into having an injection, or they've been restrained or twitched while a vet was trying to give them an injection, or they've had, two people hanging onto a head collar. And actually, aversive handling and aversive training creates trauma in horses and creates fear in horses and creates fear of being confined, because when I'm in a stable and two people come in at once, I can be sure something bad's going to happen. So, I think there are more problems caused to horses and humans, more damage caused to horses and humans by forceful training done badly, and forceful training done well, than might be created by someone who's thinks ahead and plans ahead and prepares their horse for the things that might happen, and has used food to do that. So I think they're really important things for us to be honest with ourselves about, you know, when it comes to thinking about whether we're doing the right thing for our horses. And I think there's universal things that everybody should do. You know, training horses for hoof handling. Believe it or not, I get so many, I mean, I turn a lot of them down these days. I get so many requests for people to come and help me train their horses to have their feet trimmed, because they've at their wits' end, because they've used lots of different types of forceful ways of doing it, and it become really dangerous for them. So I think, you know, there's potentially much more danger and harm caused by the use of force in trying to get horses to do things than there are people neglecting to train their horses to do things that are important for their welfare. So I think I'm more concerned about the welfare impact of, you know, very forceful training on our ability to do things as simple as pick up a horse's foot and clean it out, or just check a small wound, or give them routine vaccinations, or treat them, you know, do their teeth. And I think if the aversive training world was really great at all of those things, then they'd have some legs to stand on to criticize, you know, the tree huggers amongst us who don't want to make our horses do things that they don't like. So, you know, we can all improve, can't we? We can all do better. Does that answer that bit of your question, do you think, you two?
Yeah, I
Hello,
think
what do you
it's
think?
yeah, I really like you saying it. And I feel kind of relieved about it also, because it's easy for me to be like very self-criticizing, that I really don't want to be stuck in cognitive bias and just this is my view, so therefore if you say we should use negative reinforcement, I'm very quick to be like reflecting on it and like what do you now I have my words for it, sorry.
That's all right. You are conducting this in not your mother tongue, so yeah,
but I don't know, I have so much thought, but yeah, it's really conflicting in me also, since I have a lot of different people training reward based around me now, and that's wonderful and I really love it. But that also means that I have a lot of different voices all the time with different inputs, and it's hard to like separate them all. And I think I agree with you very much that, yeah, I think this horse that they wrote about in this Facebook group, that it was just like probably not trained properly. And as you said, also this can happen to any horse really that's not prepared, and it doesn't have to be with had to do with the specific method used, or that it's reward based training. Yeah, so I like to hear you like make it really yeah
simple. I hope I made it simple. I think what you've got to be careful of when you're listening to all of those voices is how many of those people are repeating what they heard someone else say. You know, because there's a lot of that in the horse training world. I recognized that that's what, when I studied natural horsemanship, which I did for years, And then I learned about behavior change science after that and realized what I've been doing. And then I realized I'd just been repeating what someone else told me to say and think. You know, I've been saying things like make the right thing easy and the wrong thing difficult. And, you know, we should do this with horses. And because I'd heard a guru in authority figure say that, and yet I didn't have the means, because I didn't have the underlying knowledge of the science, to question that and query that. And that's something I would encourage everybody to do, is actually don't follow a method, you know, don't follow a method, learn how behavior works, learn how animals learn and form perceptions of things. And then when someone tries to get you to follow a method or tells you what their method is, you can deconstruct that and you can know what they're actually recommending you do, and you can decide if it's something that you want to do or not. But a lot of we're primates as humans, so we just copy what other people say without thinking it through. And when you're aware that you do that, you become more of a critical thinker about, you know, and look for the scientific principles behind what's being put forward. It's probably worth saying something about, well, if we're going to prepare our horses for these things, like being kept in a stable and restrained, you know, we're going to need to take them into situations where we're required to put a halter and lead rope on them by a veterinarian. I, not that long ago, had to take my horse to the vets in Edinburgh, and they insisted on him wearing a Chifney bit, which I don't know if you know what those are, but they're used on race horses. They're almost thin as a coat hanger wire.
Okay.
And they insisted on it because it was according to them, their insurance required the horse to wear that bit. And I said, you can put it in his mouth and he'll tolerate it, but he'll just follow you anyway. And they said, oh, he has to wear it, but we won't attach a rope to it. I said, well, that's great. I'll agree to that. Just have the rope on his head collar. And they put it in his mouth and he just went, yeah, don't like this much, but anyway, where are we going? And off they went. And I allowed them to do that because I was confident he wasn't going to do anything that made them feel like they needed to use that bit. So the question we've got is how do we prepare our horses for that? You know, with positive reinforcement, for me, it's one piece of the jigsaw, and the other two pieces of the jigsaw that are super important for us to know and actually get less attention than the use of positive reinforcement, systematic desensitization and counter conditioning. And that is graduated exposure. So systematic desensitization. So if we're training a force-free trained horse to go in the stable and building up to where we want them to be able to stay in the table 24/7, which will be difficult for any horse, no matter what, then we'd want them to have some free choice about going in there. So we might want to put food in there, but leave the door open and allow them to wander in, have some food and come out again. When it came to shutting the door, we might want to go as if to shut the door and then open the door again. And we might want to do that gradually over a period of time to where we can shut the door for a few seconds and the horse doesn't respond, and then we can open the door and go away. And then build that up to increasing amounts of time in stables. So we're making the stable a nice place to be because there's yummy things to eat in there. And we're not locking the horse, we're not putting the horse in a stable and shutting it in there overnight for the first time. But also thinking about how could we set the environment up so the horse is not concerned about being in the stable, and that's his best friend is in the one next door and he's not stressed. So you know, we can prepare horses for these things, but what typically happens in an aversive training paradigm is the horse is brought into the field and stuck in a stable and the door's shut and everybody goes home. And that is more of a flooding scenario. What's worse is sometimes horses are brought in, put in those stables, can't see their friends, run out of food overnight, and then the stable becomes a very unsafe place to be because they can't escape, they can't see anyone who would make them feel safe, and they become anxious because they might run out of food. And that, you know, I've seen plenty of horses trained with aversives in that situation. My own, Elna knows Archie, my big old Irish draft horse. He has a phobia of being shut in a stable in a certain situation. And we believe that's because when he came from Ireland, and it's very common in some parts of the world to wean horses as foals by taking mom and baby into a stable, letting mom out and locking baby in, and then mom is taken away. Now that is traumatic for horses. So when Archie had to be on box rest, I've had to have my horse confined 24/7 for 2 periods of 3 months each when he tore ligaments in first one front leg and then the next. And we had to develop a protocol where we took him and his stable friend outside. Archie was tied up in the yard with a hay net with some other horses, and his stable friend Harley was put in the field, and then we could put Archie back in the stable. But if we took his friend away from him when he was locked in the stable, he would panic, really panic. And that, I think, is a bit of forensic information that tells us the way in which he was introduced to stabling was really traumatic for him. And now he's terrified of being in a stable. He's terrified that his friend will be taken away when he's in the stable. But the fact that I could put him back in the stable with a treat ball and lots of hay, and then all the other horses could one by one go out and he'd actually be okay all day, tells you something about his past experience of, you know, stabling. So there are ways of going about introducing horses to these things that can create problems for life, and there are ways of introducing them that can make it a much more stress-free situation. And that's true whether you're using positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement. So if somebody came to me as a horse behavior consultant who said, I'm committed to aversive training, I want to event my horse, I want to show jump, I know that I can't use treats to do that. I know it's not very nice for the horse, but that's why I bought the horse, that's what I want to do. But how can I best introduce my horse to being in a stable? What I would advise them would be exactly the same as if somebody came to me and said, I don't want to use aversives with my horse, I want to use food reinforcers. Because there's good ways of going about that and there's rubbish ways of going about it. So yes, I think we should prepare them for confinement. I think we should prepare them for restraint. So the contrast would be if we were training a positively trained horse trained with systematic desensitization and counter conditioning to stand tied up, then I'd probably target train them at a spot and make that the sweet spot and have a portable target so that wherever they're tied up, their target's there. Make sure they've got lots of hay to eat while they're tied up. And the first time we just target train at that spot, and then we all go back and, you know, go back to our field, do our own thing. Build that up gradually, build up the duration gradually. And over time, the horse, you know, then when the horse is tied up, he doesn't care that he's tied up because he's got stuff to eat and he's just quite happy at standing at his sweet spot. You know, The thing that you might do if you're a natural horsemanship trainer, however, is you might tie a horse to something called a patience pole, which they can't break loose of. It's usually a rigid pole in the ground with a tie ring high up. Tie the horse to it's called a patience pole. It should be called a torture pole. So he can't get away, he can't break his head collar, and leave him there till he gets used to it. You know, that's a really cruel way, and in an ineffective way of training a horse to tolerate restraint. Because the horse isn't staying there because it's a good place to be. He's staying there because he can't get away. So, you know, it's thinking about how we would train horses to cope with being restrained or confined. There's good ways of doing those and there's bad ways of doing them, regardless of what approach you're using to produce repeatable behavior. Does that make sense? Do you want to add anything, or you're muted, Gaia? Sorry.
I have something to add, but do you want to say anything, Elna? First,
You can add it first.
I think you touch on a really important part of the discussion, this thing about how critical it is to think about the practices that we have surrounding the horses. So like, if the discussion is very easily put on what should the trainer do and what should the horse know, but what about like the practices around how we handle it? So for example, does the horse have to be in a stable inside where they don't see any horses? Can we make a space inside their pasture where they can see horses? Or like what you did with Archie, that you allow for flexibility in how you handle the situation to better fit the horse's behavior and their biology. But so many people don't have the patience for that, because training a horse to stand tied using a target and stuff takes time of your day. Tying it up to a patience pole takes you tying it up and then you can go do whatever. And if you have been taught that that is what you're supposed to be doing, then having to go out of your way to start target training them to a sweet spot is going to be very different. And you don't want to be changing your practices that much because it takes time out of your day. So
yeah, and it's a short-termism, you know, and I think you're absolutely right. And I think the digital world has taught us to have even less time, you know, and less tolerance for something that takes time. But I'm going to quote a natural horsemanship phrase now, and that's, if you take the time it takes less time.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Because if you take the time it takes, what you do is actually going to be effective. If you don't take the time it takes, what you'll find is what you do doesn't work anyway. You know, there are no shortcuts. There are no shortcuts. You know, and it's the people that haven't got time are the people that are going to be saying, oh, crumbs, no, my horse got colic and I need to load him on a trailer and get to a vet, but I can't because he won't go on the trailer and now I've got to euthanize him. Or, you know, my horse has torn a ligament and the vet said he needs to be in the box for 3 months and I haven't trained him to be in the box at all. And now that isn't going to heal ever because he's going to go crazy. So I'm going to have to euthanize him. You know, those are the people that haven't taken the time. And, you know, the horse suffers. Yeah, either the horse suffers or it costs them a lot more time and a lot more money than they would have spent if they'd just done it right in the first place. So yeah. Elna, anything you want to add to that, or Gaia, you want to come back on that?
Also, things like go.
But but this was a thing you said for a while ago. So I think maybe it's maybe a different part of the subject, but you said this, it's easy we start just repeating what other people have said, or that many people just, it's the same voice really. Everybody say the same thing. I'm just aware that it's a risk that we do it as well in our community, that we start just repeat, let's just feed more, just lower value, and you just say it without maybe not really understand them, or not really giving the context for it. You're just repeating the same. And I have heard from people that really want to discuss using of negative reinforcement in reward-based training, that they are easily like just quiet by the same phrases over and over again, that no, we shouldn't, because you can train everything with positive reinforcement. And then that we are like doing the same kind of, even though I would agree with you, and I really feel that we can do it with positive methods, but that we maybe have to develop a language for it then.
Yeah, I know what you mean. We've got to be, and that's why I think you would say you try to be, we've almost got to be whiter than white if we're going to put forward something that is going to cause dissonance in other people, you know, and be aware of our own, because we're also human, so we are going to copy other people as well, and just being more aware of that.
Yeah.
Did you want to come back with something, Gaia?
Yeah, no, just like another example of like flexibility in practices. So like, say that you have a horse that is you haven't had time to train it to be inside a big building, a stable, and you have to bring it to the vet for any reason whatsoever. This could be a horse that has been trained using positive reinforcement or aversive, it doesn't really matter, but they just don't want to be inside. So you ask the vet, could we do this outside instead? Like, could you come out to us here by the trailer? We're just outside your veterinary clinic. And then the vet says no, because that's the way our practice works. You have to come inside, you have to tie them up, and they have to stand there with a racehorsing bit in their mouth, like you had to do. So like those things are so small and they would cost nothing, and still we are so against like a cat having to take a bath, you know, like, no, we can't do that because that's how we have always done it, so you have to come inside. But and it's really frustrating.
And I think what we should do is remember that when we employ a veterinarian, we're paying, you know, and you not everywhere in the world do you have a choice. I know that some places in the world there are very few veterinarians around and they don't have a choice at all, and you have to go with what there is. But if you build a relationship with your vet, and you talk to your vet in advance and you say, this is how I would like it to go with my horse, and I would like to be there, and I'll handle him, and how can I prepare my horse for this at home before we get there? Then you'll have a vet who'll work with you. And a lot of it is about building a good relationship, finding a good vet who's sympathetic to what you do, who can see that your horse is good to have vaccinations, and they're good. They will keep the foot still on an x-ray. And they will, when you go to the vet, they will walk in and out of a treatment room easily. Then you can build a good relationship with your vet, both by talking to your vet and seeing things from their point of view and asking them, what will you need to do that I can work to prepare for so that your life's easier? But if in the end of the day you get a vet who isn't cooperative, then take your money somewhere else if you can, you know. So there's a couple of other things that I wanted to pick up on that I think are really crucial in what you've said. And that is, you know, should we train our horses with negative reinforcement, pressure and release, so that when they encounter other people who are going to use aversive training, then they know what that, they understand it. And I would say, other than in the natural horsemanship world, and even that is very variable and small and shrinking, thankfully, outside of the natural horsemanship world, I don't see anybody using negative reinforcement. What I see are people applying aversives and keeping them on. So there is no release. So I can drive along in my car behind a group of horse riders, and you know what I see is kick, 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 pull, kick, kick. I don't see good use of negative reinforcement in the normal run of things in the traditional horse training world, whether you're at the vet, whether you're dealing with a farrier or a hoof trimmer, or your riding school. I volunteered for a while at a local riding school for people taking riding for disabled lessons. And for the entire hour that those children were sitting on those ponies, the people leading them were holding the lead rope about 4 inches from the buckle and dragging the ponies around the school for an hour, and with no release on their heads at all. And these are, some of them are experienced horse riders and experienced horse people. That's why they're there, because they can handle horses, and they're handling those horses with, you know, disabled people riding them. But what I don't see negative reinforcement happening in the normal horse world. So even if I taught Archie, my horses have both been negative reinforcement trained because I used to do natural horsemanship. But even if I took a brand new horse and I trained that horse to follow pressure on the halter, that's not what he's going to experience if I hand him over to somebody else. You know, he's going to get dragged around, and he's going to get pushed. You know, if they want him to move into the stocks, so Archie had to go to, he was in the vet, actually at the vets for 2 periods of 15 days, about 5-6 years ago, no more than that actually, because he had a sinus infection. He had a cyst in his sinus cavity, and he ended up having to have surgery. And he was actually at the vet clinic for 2 weeks the first time, and then he got fungal infection about 2 months later, which was because of all the antibiotics he'd had. And he had to go back and spend another 14 days in hospital. And they said, he's a real angel, he's absolute angel, even though we're bringing him in twice a day, putting him in the crush, in the stocks, I call them, where he can't move, giving him anesthetic and then tubing him up the nose. Every day, he'll still walk in there with us and go into those stocks. And I said, well, they said, we just give him time. He goes, oh, we're in here again. And I watched what they do, because obviously they've got to get the horse to hindquarters to move over. There's a really good vet nurse, and she just put a bit of pressure on his hind end until he moved away from her hand, and then she stopped, and then she did it again. That was a very unusual, pretty good example of somebody using negative reinforcement. And actually, because years ago I taught him to move away from light pressure on his hip, he was just doing what I taught him to do before. But that's so unusual. Mostly what you'll see, well, what do you think you'd see? If somebody wants a horse to move its back end sideways, what do you think you'll see them do? Just imagine it.
They will just push until they are moved all the way. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They'll keep pushing. So they'll just keep pushing and pushing and pushing until the horse is where they want them to be. They won't, and then they stop. They don't think, actually, that horse, you know, stepping sideways at hind end, they've got to kind of think a bit about where they're putting their feet, and they've got to balance. And actually pushing on them overbalances them, and that's why they step, to regain their balance. But you don't give them chance to regain their balance before you're pushing them again. So most people would just shove and shove and shove and shove, as if they were pushing a big log into a corner. So I think that's the first issue. Even if your horse is trained to move away from pressure or follow pressure, if you pull them on the head or push them away, you're very rarely going to see people doing it. And then what happens? The effort that you've put into training well with negative reinforcement, that reinforcer is extinguished because they no longer get reinforced for performing the correct behavior. So if you perform a behavior for which you've previously received some form of reinforcement, whether that's negative reinforcement or positive reinforcement, and it doesn't get reinforced, then you are on a path to extinction, which means that the horse will just stop responding, because responding doesn't result in either a positive reinforcer or a negative reinforcer. So you could do lots of nice training like this and spend lots of time doing it. You could even introduce mixing positive and negative reinforcement, which I know lots of people like to do, create lots of conflicts, train your horse to do all of those things, but then they don't get reinforced. So they're going to go, well, that was a bit of a waste of time, but I didn't get any choice anyway. I just got shoved into the corner, and now I'm here. They're going to stab me in the neck as well. So, you know, what we have to realize is that if we think it's important for us to train negative reinforcement so that when horses encounter other people who are using aversive training, we better go and teach all those other people how to use negative reinforcement as well, because right now, not very many of them are doing that at all. So they're going to extinguish all the cues you've taught using either positive or negative reinforcement. And bear in mind, you know, if you're asking the horse to do something and it really has a reason not to do it, it really doesn't want to do it because it's afraid, or it's being taken away from its friend, or it's got its expectation is that if it complies, something bad will happen, then neither form of training will work. Negative reinforcement won't work, and neither will positive reinforcement. So, you know, what's the answer to that? Well, the answer to that is back to preparation. You know, if we prepare our horses for injections and make sure that when they get an injection, something great happens, or we're clever and we say, can we use distraction? So the horse goes, oh, I think I was about to get bitten by a horsefly, but it's gone now. That, you know, what techniques can we use to prepare our horses for these things so that they're a non-event? And the more non-events there are, the less trigger stacking that you'll get, and the less need you'll have to use pressure or escalating pressure, because you'll have a horse that's pretty much okay with most things, but maybe a little bit wary of that thing. So I think that's the big issue of all, is people who in the positive reinforcement world are wondering whether they should train their horses with negative reinforcement in case anyone else is going to use aversives with them, needs to realize that they're not using negative reinforcement or pressure release anyway. It's just pressure and more pressure. You know, there's nothing in it for the horse to comply for the most part. Does that Am I unique in observing that, or is that what you've seen in your country with horse people? Gaia, do you want to go first?
No, I agree. You make a very good point. I don't think I have definitely thought about the fact that I feel like people are not taught how negative reinforcement works. So if you look at riding schools and stuff, and it's very it's so unlikely that you see a riding school instructor actually explaining why you should do something. And instead of just making it out to be some kind of magical thing that happens if you use your left leg instead of your right leg, as if your left leg is hocus pocus. It's like, no, you can teach it the other way around too if you would want. You just but I have not thought about the part of why would we need to train it then. That you went on to explain. That was very insightful.
Yeah. Elna?
Yeah, I would like to try my thoughts now, because I know Gaia have heard me rant about this a lot, but my thinking is that we can prepare for these smaller things. Like we can teach a horse to stop by using positive reinforcement, and we can do it by using negative reinforcement, and we can do it in like a relaxed way home in our pasture, and teach our horse to do it when everything is okay. And then we are out in the forest, we'll say, and it's coming a dog, and the horse will be really scared and just want to run away. What I can like, it doesn't matter if I are trained with negative reinforcement or positive reinforcement, the reinforcement value will be as big either way, and probably it won't override the fear of the dog, so the horse want to run away anyhow. And so the only thing that I have left is like keep hold of the rope so the horse doesn't run away from me if I have to, if that's the safest thing to do. Then it won't matter if I have trained the horse with pressure or with treats at home. And that's like a very common argument. What will you do if your horse are trying to run away? Yeah, I will keep hold of the rope, because it doesn't matter really. Would you agree about that?
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. And the key there is, why would either of us be walking in the forest where we could meet a dog if we hadn't already introduced the horse to dogs and made sure the dog was okay? Yeah, so you're absolutely right. Where the the value of the threat is greater than the value of the treat, or the value of the threat of the dog is greater than what the horse fears you will do, then that horse is going to respond to the threat of the dog. And it's all relative values. So what if we reduced the threat of the dog to zero by introducing the horse to dogs in advance in a controlled way, and play them video recordings of dogs barking, and get them used to the commotion that sometimes happens when a dog runs by.
To ease the dogs is the best thing. That means treats, lots of treats.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's
the dogs come in. Where's my treat? Goes the horse. There's a dog, woman. Where's my treat?
but
I get a treat now. Yeah, absolutely. And actually, we both have a better time. Both the aversive trainer and the positive trainer would have a much better experience of walking in the forest if we prepared our horse for the dog. And then what happens is you don't, yes, if you're the positive trainer and you're afraid that if the horse gets away from you, they could come to harm, then you are going to hold on to your rope.
Yeah.
But what you're then going to do is, as soon as the horse puts that rope goes loose, I am stuffing my horse with treats to go, thank you for putting, slack in the rope. That was great. That was the right thing to do. Because even though I'm not wanting to use pressure to train, if something happens where the horse responds in a good way, where there was pressure, I'm going to go, yes, I've got a way of saying to the horse, yes, that's what you should do. So, but the key to that is back to preparation again. If you associate dogs with good, well, when you see a dog, good stuff happens, then you don't get into that situation in the first place.
No.
And, it's unrealistic, for whether you're a positive trainer or an aversive trainer, it's unrealistic to expect to take a horse out for a walk in the forest and have it not react if a dog comes running. That's a completely unrealistic expectation. So, yeah, but you're right. I mean, people say that all the time. Oh, well, what are you going to do if, what are you going to do if you're out with your horse and the horse spooks and tries to run away and it's dangerous? Ha ha ha! You don't have anything to stop the horse with. What about all the people that are riding in bits whose horses bolt? Seems to me they don't have anything to stop the horse with either, because if they did, the horse wouldn't be bolting. So that's a bit of an empty argument, really, isn't it? I don't have anything to stop the horse with, but actually, if I've built up a history of reinforcement, and the horse's perception of me is that when they're around me, good stuff's going to happen.
Yeah.
Then the horse is going to go, they're going to go, I'd like to run away from the dog. But have you got anything to offer? So I think if you've got a good reinforcement history, the horse is going to look to you when something bad happens, particularly if you build that up. There's a practice that I employ with both my horses where, when you're training your horse with food and something comes into the environment that distracts them, it can be an aircraft flying over, it can be someone, opens a car door, somebody walks past the arena, but there's some sort of distraction occurs. And the horse's attention is momentarily taken away from you, and that's fine. I want them to look, assess it, decide it's not a threat, and then check back in. I always reinforce them for checking back in.
Yeah.
So whenever they go, oh, what was that? All right, hang on, where were we? And they do that, where were we thing? Like, yeah, let's do the next thing now. I always reinforce that. And I've had that work really well for me in a couple of situations where the horse has been afraid. And then I'll go, what if I check back in? And then something good happens. And then you've associated that something good with whatever the event was that, you followed that mildly aversive event by something pleasant. Then you're counter conditioning on the fly there. So,
yeah.
Yeah,
you're actually kind of preparing for aversives there, I would say as well.
Yeah.
As part of the discussion started in, like, to be able to the horse see aversive things or experience something aversive and have already associated this with, okay, this is not really nice, but maybe if I check back in or if I look somewhere else in my environment, there are pleasant things, because they usually come after aversive things.
Yeah. And what a foal will do, if you think about what you'll see foals do, is what do they do when something stressful happens? First thing they do, they go and suckle.
Yeah.
They go and look for comfort. Oxytocin actually counteracts the effects of fear-inducing stimuli.
Yeah.
And they're looking for comfort. It's not just food, they actually get comfort from it as well. So if you're a place of comfort and safety and good stuff, then, I could argue that a horse turning to me after a mildly stressful event, or turning to me for some food, is almost an emancipated behavior from the foal looking to suckle when little stressful things happened in foal world. So those are we've covered some really big topics. There's one other one that I wanted to mention, and that's, are the things for which we can't train using positive reinforcement. I think there's lots of things for which we can't train using positive reinforcement. Bearing in mind that what is positive reinforcement training for? It's to teach the horse a repeatable behavior. So the positive reinforcement bit is about, we set the environment up to cause a behavior that we'd like the horse to perform, to happen. And we either do that by organizing the environment, or we use a prop like a target. And then we look to capture the behavior that we want, mark it in some way with a bridging stimulus, so a clicker or a vocal signal or a visual signal, and then follow that with a positive reinforcer. And our objective is to get the horse to do the behavior again. And then, if we're good trainers, we very quickly introduce a cue so that we can use that cue as the prompt for the behavior, and then marker reinforce. So that's really what positive reinforcement's for. It's just that part of getting horses to, walk on, whoa, turn, back up, stand. There's not that many things that are pick your foot up, relax your foot in my hand. It's not, if you think about it, there's not that many different behaviors that we want to teach horses to do, that we want to be on cue, move over, whatever, come here, all those sorts of things. I could make a list of the common things we want horses to do repeatedly, probably on the fingers of two hands. But the things that we want, the things that we need horses to be able to cope with in order for them to respond to those cues, there's thousands. There's dogs, there's somebody walking past the arena, there's a car going past, there's fireworks, there's a chainsaw going off in the field next door, there's a lawnmower, there's somebody opened their front door as I ride past their house. There's millions of things that horses need to be able to handle if they're going to be able to respond to any of our cues. Because coming back to the threat thing again, if the value of the threat, whether you're training with aversives or you're training with positive reinforcers, if the threat is worth more than the relief or the reward, then the animal is going to respond to the threat. And there's millions of those. Neither we nor aversive trainers can really train horses to expect horses to perform repeatable behaviors. Walk on, whoa, turn right, turn left, go backwards. If there is a threat in the environment that they perceive to be stronger than what we have to offer. And that's why when you're training with aversives, you use escalating aversives, because you need to make what you're offering more painful than the thing the horse is trying to avoid. If you want to stop a horse running away from a dog, then you need to pull the reins pretty hard or turn the horse pretty hard to stop them running away, if they perceive the dog to be a bigger threat than their expectation of the pain in their mouth from a bit. And guess what? Horses bolt. Why do they bolt? Because they find whatever they're afraid of is more worrying to them than the pain they're experiencing on their head or in their mouth. And by the way, adrenaline suppresses pain sensation anyway. So, you can be really severe, but when you're on adrenaline, they're not going to respond anyway, even if your aversives are really harsh. So go on, Elna, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I just thought that was a really good point with adrenaline.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And there's one more I'll make, and that is the other things that we can't expect to train horses to do with positive reinforcement, things that require a lot of effort. So I would say there is a limit to what a horse will do for food reinforcers, either because they become satiated or because they perform a cost benefit analysis. So they go, is it worth it for me to do this? Or do I expect something better if I just don't comply? Yeah. So really practical example, I am strip grazing my horses at the moment. So they're in a field where we're giving them a little bit of extra grass every day. And they're coming in off the field at night onto the arena and the yard because the ground's wet. So they get to go out during the day, they get brought in at night, they've got free range on everywhere but the fields, and they get plenty of hay in the stable, and I give them a feeder when they come in. If I move that fence before I ask my horses to come in with me at night, they'll go, nah, we're staying here, there's loads of grass, why would we follow you? Even though you've got lovely hay cobs that are made in Switzerland with lots of herbs in, or carrots, if we could stay here and eat the grass, we'd much rather do that. Thank you for asking, but no, we'll have the grass rather than the trees. So where you've got, a stronger reinforcer than, or a more valuable reinforcer than what you've got to offer. But the other is, how much effort would a horse go around a 3-star cross-country course, or in fact a 1-star cross-country course, or even 10 show jumps, if they could, if what they got at the end of it was a couple of carrots? Of course they wouldn't. So if you want to compete your horse, don't bear in mind when you're competing, if you're using negative reinforcement, you're using it for every move they make. Every stride that horse makes, they're making to escape or avoid pressure. Every time they jump the fence, they're making the jump to escape or avoid pressure, because that's the environment they're in. It's an aversive training. Jumping the jump is not as bad as what would happen if I didn't jump the jump. So, if you're trying to use your horse in competition, and in competition context, you can't stop after every jump and give him 3 carrots and then, would you mind awfully jumping the next jump? Have somebody with a target the other side of the jump, and then he gets another 3 carrots. The whole system of horse sport is not set up for people to use positive reinforcement. And I think that's precisely because the effort required for the horses to do those behaviors. They just go, no, all right, thanks, I've had enough carrots now, or no, I just don't think it was worth all that effort for the reward that's being offered. So I think, I would just say, if you want to compete, learn negative reinforcement and be really good at it. And by the way, prepare your horse for a competition environment so that you're not having to escalate pressure because they're not afraid of something. They're not more afraid of something than they are of what you'll do. But, let's be realistic. There are limits to what we could train horses to do with positive reinforcement, but there are probably no limits to what we could teach them to be confident with and happy about if we used systematic desensitization and counter conditioning proactively. So yeah, that's everything I'd got of things I want to rant about. Do you want to add anything to that, Elna? Yeah.
I have a case for you.
Oh, great.
And it's very personal and emotional also to me. As you've seen, I have a foal, Sigrid, and she has to get her feet done of course, and we have started to do a lot of preparation training for it. Yes, for long ago, I have had the like trimming stuff with me out in the pasture. Yes, having them around her and having them on her feet and like everything. That's fine. I can touch or I can touch her legs. She even lift her feet sometimes of other reasons in my lap, and that's fine, and I can hold them for a little bit, and she knows I just let them go if she pull on them, or if it's like if she's uncomfortable in one anyway, I'm just letting her go. So we have prepared a lot for it, but we haven't really get a good like just holding them up to be able to trim them properly. We are not there yet. So when we had the farrier out last week, or it was just in this Wednesday, I was prepared that, okay, I know that we will have to lift her feet up for her, and we will have to hold them, even though it's forcing her, and I know that, but we will make the best of the situation, have her mom beside, be in a place we have been before. I will scratch her, everything. And I was like, okay, let's do this. But she actually reacted much stronger than I believed she would. So she kind of just backed up and just pulled her leg, and it was really hard for her. And it's we posted, we have a really good farrier. She's great with them. So she was like, okay, we take another horse first. So they went away for a while. We could start over, and then they came back, and we did just 2 feet. And I had a lot of help from the others because I was mostly just stressed about the situation myself as well, because I hate to see them like that. And my thought were like, okay, so now I have prepared her and trained, just focusing on all the positive reinforcement way I can train it. I haven't trained her for me forcing her up her feet. And that's a scenario I'm like, should I train the situations like that in this situation I might force you and I might hold your feet because you have to get them trimmed? Would that have helped her in that situation?
You could, but you'd be training her with negative reinforcement, because you'd basically be saying, but if you were very good at training her with negative reinforcement, then you could probably do that in a way that she didn't find stressful.
Yeah.
You know, and that means, and actually, if you think about it, hoof handling, interestingly, I think hoof handling is a special case of training, because to some extent, you are always using some form of negative reinforcement, even if you're using positive reinforcement, because it's difficult for horses to stand on 1 front foot and 2 back feet. No matter how you train it, it's difficult for them to do that. So whenever you let go that front foot, then you are going to negatively reinforce whatever they were doing when you let it go. Yeah. And actually, well-trained farriers know that, which is why they try not to let go when horses are struggling. They try to let go when the horse, you know, they'll hang on for grim death if the horse is struggling, and try only to let go when they stop. And that's just because it's by happy accident they do that, because that's what they're taught. If you let go when the horse struggles, they'll struggle even harder. And that's accurate, because what the horse learned is struggling worked. So yes, you could, if you were really good at training with negative reinforcement, then you could use a combination of negative reinforcement and positive reinforcement. But what I would say to you, you are anyway. you are anyway with front feet, because whenever you take a front foot off a horse, then that is difficult for them to balance.
Yeah.
So, and it's remembering that as well. You know, it's things like, before you ask for that front foot, make sure the horse is already balanced on the other three.
Yeah.
So if the back legs are trailing out behind her, and you pick up a front leg, it's like chopping a leg off a table. But if she's base wide behind, if her back feet are wide and her front feet are close together, then when you pick up one of those front feet, she's like a three-legged stool, so she can balance.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, when they come to train horses to pick their feet up, aren't aware of all those things, and don't necessarily ask the horse to pick the foot up at the right time, and then the horse struggles, and then they have to let go because it's hard to hang on. And then they've taught the horse to struggle. They go, oh, well, all I need to do is pull my foot and I get away, which is why I think when you first introduced the case and you said, you know, if she doesn't like it, I just let her go. It's better to let her go before she struggles.
Yeah, I know that.
And that's what I know. That's why you did it. But people listening might not know that.
Yeah, I always try not to hold it so that she struggles. But when she's like, I let it go, rather than she starting to pull it and starting to like escalating.
It's better to let go sooner. It's better to. Well, I don't like I my fairy hoof mother, Vicky Thea, who used to look after our horses' feet when we lived in the Midlands, when she found me a new hoof trimmer, and she said to the hoof trimmer, we have a golden rule with these horses: you do not let go of their feet. You don't pick their feet up, do what you can do, and just let go. You place the foot down, because if you let them go, that and when they've let you take their foot and you let their foot go and their foot falls on the ground, it can hurt. I think it would hurt. Let's assume it would hurt. So you want to be able to you know, what you're looking to reinforce when you're picking up a horse's feet is that the foot is relaxed in your hand, and then you put it down again. And I know you know that, but that's what you're looking for. So actually you've got to think about, is the way I'm causing the horse to pick their foot up in the first place a relaxed thing? Or are they snatching their foot away because I've pulled hair or tickled them or I've overbalanced them? So if you haven't already got it, Elna, reread my hoof handling lesson, because my hoof handling lesson, the horse charming hoof handling lesson, is really long and it covers all this stuff. It covers different ways to cause the horse to pick their foot up in the first place, and what it is you're looking to reinforce. Because ultimately it's if they relax their foot in your hand, you let go. Now, if you're training with negative reinforcement, obviously you have to make a decision. If the horse begins to struggle, do I wait until she stops struggling and then let go? And you have to make a decision. In the moment, you've got to read your own horse and go, is she just fidgeting a bit? And if I just hang on and wait, will she relax a bit and then I can let go? You know, you've got to do that with your own horse in that situation. But the best thing is to find a way of causing them to pick the feet up that isn't for relief in the first place. And that is quite difficult. It's easy with hind feet. It's not so easy with front feet because they don't really want to lift them anyway.
Yeah.
Does that help and make sense?
Yeah,
and
it makes sense, definitely. I think it's the struggle I have is like, I really want to be able to train it properly with positive reinforcement, and that's to be enough, but it isn't really yet. And there I'm like, is it better for me to train it than letting the farrier trying to do it when she's here, if she's not ready, if she's not comfortable choosing to lift her feet yet, or and actually holding them still there for long enough.
Yeah, I think the trouble is you're asking a lot of the farrier, unless your farrier is really good at negative reinforcement.
Yeah.
And knows how to read the horse and go, good girl, you just relax your foot in my hand, I'm gonna put it down now.
You're right.
And then the horse goes, oh, that's okay then. I know that if I just let my foot go loose, they'll put it down. Then and obviously you've got to build duration on. Unless your farrier's really good at negative reinforcement, it's a big ask for them to do it. I've been in situations where people were worried about holding the horse's foot, even when they're using positive reinforcement. And I've said, well, if you're worried about that, then use a rope around their foot. You know, get them used to a rope around their foot and use a rope to hold their foot. There's no reason why that should be any more stressful to a horse than having their foot held by a hand, really. And sometimes it can enable you to just manage the situation a little bit better. I think with hoof handling, it really helps to have someone else, though. It helps having someone else there who can feed the horse at the front. And I also think sometimes distraction can work. You know, although we would say, well, if you haven't got your horse trained for doing this with positive reinforcement, you've only got force. And as long as you're honest with yourself and you go, I recognize in this situation we've got to do this, so force will be used, but we're going to try and use it really well. So we're going to try and release when the horse is doing something that we want more of. But preparation absolutely is the key to all of that, isn't it? But don't rule out other techniques. You know, sometimes I've had situations where I've had a vet needing to do something to Archie that I knew was going to be painful. He slipped off the trailer and cut his heel on the ramp of the trailer, and there was a big flap of skin hanging off, and it was really sore. And I said to the vet, if you tell me when you're going to cut it, I'll do something at the front. So what I did was I just target trained him at the front. I just went target and he touched it and I went click treat. And I just did it over and over again, really, really fast. And because he was a real solid target trained horse, he just went, I don't usually get to do it this much. And he was so focused on doing the target training, she cut this flap of skin off his foot and he sort of swished his tail a bit. And she went, the vet just said, he doesn't care, does he? And I went, no, I was just really distracting him up front with a really, you know, he was really focused on the thing I was giving him to do at the other end. And that foot is a long way from his brain that, you know, you could just get on and do it. I've done that with another horse, and actually I did that literally on the fly with a horse I'd never trained before. Somebody asked me to clip the legs of a pony that had got a very bad, it's actually a bacterial infection we call it Melendez in the UK. It's like they just get lots of lesions, and they usually get them where the skin bends, like at the back of the knee. And she said the vet had said to her she'd got to keep all the hair off his legs and put this ointment on every week. Well, of course, his legs were sore. So I got one of my working students. I said, what we're going to do is you're going to be outside the stable with a target and a treat bag. And you're just going to keep presenting this to him over and over and over again. And I'm going to clip his legs. And that's what we did. And we hadn't trained him to stand still or anything. And I managed to get a lot of hair off his legs before he lost patience with us. But, you know, sometimes it's not as easy when you're trying to do hoof handling. But sometimes a really use of just don't just feed them, engage their brain in something that takes their mind away from the thing that you're trying to do. That can be a really effective solution to use when you haven't trained for something. So a couple of strategies there. But negative reinforcement is still your friend in situations where you haven't trained. You've just got to make sure you're as good at doing that as you are positive reinforcement. You know, if you're having to get on a horse on a trailer to go to a vet with negative reinforcement, you know, if that horse takes a step towards the trailer, you turn around and go the other way. If the horse puts a foot on the ramp of the trailer, you go, great, let's go over here and do something else for a bit.
Yeah.
You know, understand. Great video to watch on that subject is the one, it's called oh crumbs, I can't remember what it's called now. You know, the one with the bushstone curlew, the importance of choice in animal training. And it's an Australian I think Petter, I can't remember his surname. Anyway, if you go onto YouTube and go the importance of choice in animal training, you'll find this video. The first sequence is of her training a bushstone curlew to go into a carrying crate, and she explains how.
Yeah, now I know which video.
Yeah. Give the animal the choice of reinforcer. If they want the positive reinforcer, they'll go in the crate. If they want the negative reinforcer, they'll come out. But if they've got a choice and they don't feel like you're going to force them, then they're not going to be afraid of going into the pet pack, it's called. And it's really interesting because none of those videos in that, none of the animals that you see trained in that sequence are horses. Virtually every sequence, there's a parrot, there's a cockatiel, I think, there's a bushstone curlew, there's a sea lion, or all of the training that you see is the sort of training that you would do to either load a horse in a trailer or get them to go in a stable. Every single sequence of training.
Yeah.
So, you know, horse trainers could learn a lot by watching that video and thinking, gosh, that's just like getting my horse to step on the ramp of a trailer. So, yeah, good.
It's true. And yeah, but the question is there then still, you are able to use negative reinforcement in that situation where you're training the horse to load. You don't have to train the concept of negative reinforcement separate from the loading training before you get there.
No, to
use it.
No, because they already understand it.
Yeah.
They understand that if a fly lands on them and they swish their tail, the fly goes away. Yeah. They understand that if it rains really hard and they spin round and put their bum to the rain and their head down, they don't get rain in their face. You know, they know that if they have an itch and they scratch it, it might stop itching. You know, so horses already know, like we do. They already know that if something bothers them, and the behavior they take, the action they take makes it stop, they'll do it again. So if something is painful or irritating or annoying, or they think it might be, and they run away, then they make it stop or they escape it. So they already understand the concept of negative reinforcement. It's how you're applying that in the, you know, the context in which you want, what is it you want them to learn? What stops when they respond to the pressure? You know? Yeah. But obviously there are many situations where if we're using aversives to get them to do something they don't really want to do, that's the problem. You know. Yeah. So it's have another read of the hoof handling lesson, because I go through at the beginning of that lesson what needs to be true for a horse to feel safe enough for you to take hold of its foot and hold on to it. Yeah. And there's a heck of a lot of things that need to be true that are all about systematic desensitization and counter conditioning, and not really about positive reinforcement at all. They're about, are they in a safe place? You know, do they trust you? Do they?
Yeah,
you
it's a
know,
really big thing, as I know Gaia said to me the other day as well. It's a really big thing to give away one of your feet.
yeah,
That's and even so, someone holding it,
yeah.
that's
Because horses,
very unsafe.
yeah, horses' feet and legs are their primary means of defense. You know, if you think of all the other herd animals that you know, they've all got horns.
Mm.
So I can't think. I sat the other day trying to think of, do I know, there are some breeds of animal that have small horns or not very big horns, but lots of other herd animals and what we might call flight animals have horns. Horses have hooves and they use them either to run away or to kick.
Yeah.
Now, if you've got hold of the feet so they can't run away, you better be sure they haven't got any reason in the environment that might cause them to run away,
Yeah.
including you holding onto their foot.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so yeah, there's a lot of things that need to be true. Very often when people have problems with hoof handling, it's not to do with the hooves, it's to do with the fact that taking the horse out of the field, it's on its own in a yard, and then a big van drives up with a farrier's dog barking and the radio blaring, and then it gets tied up really short, so now it's frayed before you even ask it to pick a foot up. You know, it's if you look at the world through the horse's point of view, you know, why would they ever want to relinquish control of a foot in that situation? That would be, you know, they'd be extinct if they were animals that did that, because they'd never have survived. So yeah, it's been fab discussion, people.
I agree.
Yes, I'm so happy to be a part of this, honestly. Thank you, Elna, for allowing me or asking Max if I could join.
Elna knows now that I really love questions like this, and obviously you can hear I've got lots of opinions on them, but they're things I've, you know, and it's great to discuss with people that challenge you. Yeah, it's good to be challenged because it'll improve your thinking. And it's good to be skeptical, but it's also really good to like just talk it over with like-minded people and go, but do horses, you know what, do horses really get release when pressure's applied on them in the real world anyway? So does it matter? Yeah, been really good. Any final questions or thoughts?
No.
I don't think I have a final question. I have I have another quite big question, but maybe that's for another day.
Yeah, we could do that another day. Or I could stop the recording now, and I don't mind carrying on for a little bit, but I just think we've got enough material recorded that we probably send people to sleep if we carried on. So let's stop the recording then, so we've got some material of a manageable length that we could share with the world, and then